Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into a different kind of FNAF story. Not a jump scare compilation, not a frantic theory board, but a long, unbroken timeline of clues and consequences that you can simply lie back and listen to in the quiet hours. Here, the lights stay low, the pace stays slow. This is a place for those of us who love haunted histories and tangled web timelines, but also need something gentle enough for studying, for late-night drawing, or for letting sleep creep in at the edges while the story keeps moving without us. You don't have to take notes. You don't have to catch every detail. You can just let the tale wash over you. The saga of Five Nights at Freddy's is often told as a collection of jump cuts. One game here, one minigame there, a book, a DLC, a cryptic interview. But beneath those scattered pieces, there is a single, continuous haunting. A legacy that stretches from small family diners and birthday parties to underground labs, to neon malls, and finally, to digital ghosts hiding in therapy tapes and AR headsets. From Fredbear's Family Diner to the Pizzaplex and beyond, the same restless spirits keep finding new ways to be seen. In this video, we're going to follow that haunting step by step, not just through the big moments, but through the tiny details that quietly changed everything. A date on a paycheck that suddenly rearranged which restaurant came first. A grainy TV in a child's bedroom, playing a Fredbear and Friends cartoon that anchors the bite of 83 in a very specific era. A license plate in a parking lot that tells us more about a man in purple than 3 whole games of security cameras ever said out loud. And we'll notice the background music that drifts through Circus Baby's world, the circus themes that whisper who really died where, and the way one minigame like Happiest Day offers soft closure for the missing children without ever raising its voice. We'll listen to Security Breach's retro therapy CDs, where Gregory, Vanessa, and Glitchtrap intertwine in quiet tragedies that confirm what this main story only hints at. Tiny clues, sideways glances, things most players walked past on their way to the next scream. You don't need to stay fully awake for all of it. If your mind wanders, if you drift in and out, the broad shape of the story will still be here when you return. We'll move slowly, from the earliest days of Henry and William's partnership, to remnant experiments in hidden facilities, to the mimic's digital escape, and always circling back to the clues that shifted our understanding. By the end, we'll have woven one continuous, haunted timeline from every corner of the series. Games, novels, Fazbear frights, tales from the Pizzaplex, even offhand developer comments. For now, just settle in, and we'll begin at the first quiet party, where an innocent child, a golden bear, and a flickering TV start changing everything. How tiny clues built a giant timeline. We're not handed this story. We never were. From the very beginning, the history of Freddy Fazbear's has been scattered in fragments, tucked into minigames, background props, and hidden files that most players only glimpsed in passing, drifting slowly through the experience without realizing what they were really seeing. Instead of a neat plot summary, we were given a puzzle box, a TV flickering in a child's bedroom in FNAF 4, a quiet line on a paycheck in FNAF 1, a birthday party that doesn't feel quite right in a FNAF 3 minigame, retro therapy CDS buried in Security Breach's Pizzaplex. Each piece on its own looks harmless, almost mundane, but together they weave the tangled web of this entire timeline. So, as we move forward, we're going to follow the story in order, step by step, from the earliest diners to the neon sprawl of the Pizzaplex, but we'll keep pausing at the exact moments where one tiny clue forced everyone to rethink what they thought they knew. We'll slow down at the TV in FNAF 4, where the Fredbear and Friends broadcast, and the old-fashioned visuals quietly anchor the bite of 83, even while the fandom argued about 83 and 87 for years. We'll stop at the paychecks in FNAF 1 and 2, where a simple date in the corner quietly rearranged which restaurant came first, and with it, the order of hauntings. We'll walk through the early tragedies of the diners, where the missing children and their restless spirits first enter the picture, and see how a newspaper clipping on a wall and a mask detail on an animatronic became proof that there were souls in suits. We'll descend into the sister locations, where blueprints and scooping room audio logs reveal remnant experiments long before anyone said the word outright, and where bedroom posters and family photos echo back to that frightened child in FNAF 4, suggesting who really lived in that house. From there, we'll move into simulated pizzerias and training tapes, where a license plate in a parking lot and the colour of a security badge changed how we saw Purple Guy, hinting at multiple roles, maybe even multiple killers. Then we'll surface in the Pizzaplex era, where the retro CDs and AR therapy sessions murmur in the background, confirming the haunted connection between Gregory, Vanessa, and Glitchtrap, without ever raising their voices, like quiet tragedies replaying in the shadows of a mall. Each era has at least one of these soft-spoken revelations, a single detail that quietly changes everything. Many of them are things you've already seen. The Happiest Day minigame with its paper masks and final party, a snatch of circus music in an elevator, a child's drawing on a bedroom wall. As we move through this haunted legacy, let the tale wash over you and allow your mind to revisit those scenes with fresh eyes. The clues were always there, waiting in the quiet hours. Now, we'll bring them into focus and watch the full timeline emerge around them. You, me, and a world of flickering screens. Those scenes have been waiting in the quiet hours, and now, for a little while, you don't have to chase them alone. Before we follow this tangled web of clues any further, take a moment to settle in. Adjust your pillow, loosen your shoulders, let the room dim around you until the only bright thing is the screen, faint in the darkness, and the sound of this haunted history unfolding at a gentle pace. If you can, lie back. Let your eyes grow heavy. Maybe you're listening with headphones, the outside world pushed a little further away with every slow breath. For the next 3 hours, we're going to drift through this timeline together, drifting slowly from the earliest diners to digital ghosts, from the first quiet tragedies to the restless spirits hiding in arcade cabinets and therapy tapes. Your only job is to listen and let the tale wash over you. There is no rush here. If you find this calm, detailed way of walking through the story comforting, you can always tap like or subscribe or come back to another long, haunted bedtime in the future. But there is no urgency, no pressure, no flashing reminder you have to obey. This space is meant to feel different from the jump scares and alarms that define the games themselves. You are allowed to simply be here, in the shadows between the clues. When you're more awake, I'd love to know where you're listening from and when. Some of you are probably half asleep during late-night study sessions, textbooks open beside a glowing monitor. Others might be on long commutes. I'm watching the city light smear across the window while we talk about license plates and paychecks that rewrite the story. Some of you are here in sleepless nights, letting this quiet narration keep the darker thoughts at bay. There's something strangely comforting about that. Picture it for a moment. Thousands of people scattered across time zones, under different skies and different seasons, all tuned into the same haunted timeline. In one room, someone pauses on the FNAF 4 TV, noticing how its old cartoon frames anchor the bite of 83. Somewhere else, another listener hears a snatch of circus music and finally understands which sister location is hiding beneath the ground. Different beds, different buses, different lives, all connected by the same faint glow and the same clues. And now, we'll let the meta talk fade back into the dark. No more mention of buttons or algorithms, only the slow unfolding of events. Step by step, we're going to leave the present behind and sink fully into the story, until the noise outside your door feels distant and unreal. Let the screen become a window, and as we pass through it, we'll find ourselves in the quiet haze of the 1970s, where two men, a small diner, and a pair of dangerous suits begin the legacy of Fazbear Entertainment. Let's begin. Stepping into the 1970s. Haze. Let's begin. We're no longer talking about videos or theories or channels. We're stepping through that window together and letting the real timeline unfold. In the quiet haze of the 1970s, the world feels grainy and distant, as if you're looking at it through an old home movie. Colors washed out, edges soft, and everything drifting slowly at the pace of a projector's hum. Imagine a small-town family restaurant, not yet a full pizzeria empire, just a narrow building off a local highway. The carpeting is that muted, muddied red-brown you only see in old photographs, worn thin near the door where countless shoes have passed. Faded posters lean on the walls, their smiling cartoon bears a little off-register. Ink slightly misaligned, promising birthday parties and wholesome fun in blocky fonts. Above you, fluorescent lights buzz and flicker, casting long, uncertain shadows over plastic booths and sticky tables. This is the era of Fredbear's Family Diner, even if the games never let us stand here directly. We never load into a level called Fredbear's, with a clear map and a checklist of objectives. Instead, we reconstruct this place from the haunted shadows of later stories. A phone call here, a newspaper clipping there, a casual mention of the old diner that fans freeze frame and analyze. It's a location that exists between the frames, built from implication and memory rather than rendered assets. We know, for instance, that before the bright chaos of the later Freddy's locations, there was a smaller, more intimate stage where simple mascots entertained families who had no idea what kind of legacy they were witnessing. We hear about the original restaurant in those early phone calls, about two local businessmen who started something special, and we quietly understand that this is Henry, Emily, and William Afton, standing just out of sight. The partnership is never fully narrated on screen, but it's there in the way the franchise keeps pointing back to a beginning. It refuses to show us directly. In this early period, the crucial clues are not visual details on a desk or a minigame floor. They're offhand remarks, paycheck dates, and background broadcasts that anchor the history without spelling it out. Later, a TV cartoon in a child's bedroom, advertising Fredbear and Friends, will echo back to this time. Its retro color palette and old-fashioned animation style quietly confirming that there was a show, a brand, a dream that started decades before security cameras and survival nights. The timeline is already forming, even if we only glimpse it through static. Here, in these quiet hours before the first confirmed murders, the story feels almost gentle. There are birthday songs, awkward costume performances, and the hopeful planning of two men who think they're building a harmless dream. Yet we can feel it, even from this distance. Choices are being made, designs are being approved, dangerous spring-lock suits are being put on the market. What seems like a simple business venture will become a tangled web of quiet tragedies and restless spirits, and every later clue we examine will trace back, step by step, to this dimly lit diner and the decisions born within its buzzing walls. As we move forward in the timeline, we'll watch that dream curdle, and we'll see exactly how those first, almost invisible hints begin to sharpen into open tragedy. Partners in the dark, Henry, Afton, and an unseen diner. That dream begins with two men in the quiet hours before everything goes wrong. Henry Emily and William Afton, working side by side, are sharing a vision of animatronic entertainment that would make children's eyes light up, blending careful engineering with bright, showy performance. One of them more reserved, more focused on safety and design, the other more willing to push boundaries and chase profit. Yet in these early days, they are still simply partners, building a stage for innocent families rather than a theatre for restless spirits. We never truly see their first creation in full. The original diner, the place where that partnership takes shape, exists mostly in haunted shadows and half-remembered lines. Later games whisper its name to us: Fredbear's Family Diner, a modest little restaurant, a handful of tables, a yellow bear and a rabbit in dangerous spring-lock suits. We do not walk its halls in a main game. We do not watch the doors from a static camera feed. Yet its presence is felt, drifting slowly at the edge of the timeline like a memory you are certain you had, but can never quite picture clearly. Instead, the series gives us clues, scattered quietly. Phone Guy in the first game talks about the old location, about older animatronics being moved, about a history that the player has arrived too late to witness. AF2's grand reopening language, its cheerful posters promising a fresh start, only makes sense if there was something even earlier, something smaller, that needed to be replaced. The retro aesthetic of certain minigames, with their limited colors and blocky figures, feels less like a stylistic flourish and more like a window into that lost era, reminding us that before the busy pizzerias, there was a single, simple diner where it all began. The absence itself becomes a clue, because we are never allowed a clean, well-lit look at Fredbear's Family Diner. Every later flashback, every grainy minigame, feels like a ghostly echo of that unseen place. As we move through this history, step by step, the story invites us to fill in the gaps, to imagine the cramped kitchen, the sticky floors, the stage where Henry's creations first danced under buzzing lights while Afton watched the register. This missing picture is not a weakness. It is a deliberate space, a quiet void that lets the tragedy grow larger in our minds. And then, much later, far from the supposed safety of that first partnership, a child will lie in a small bedroom, afraid of the dark, with a television at the foot of their bed. On that screen, a cheerful cartoon called Fredbear and Friends will flicker in soft, looping images, and that single TV will become the strongest visual anchor we have for this early era, quietly reshaping how we place the bite of 83, how we understand which restaurant came first, and how early the danger truly began. For now, the diner remains in shadow, but as we follow this tangled web of clues forward, we will see how that bedroom, that broadcast, and that crying child pull the entire timeline into a new, unsettling focus. Springlocks and smiles, the first deadly technology. And in that new, unsettling focus, something else begins to glint in the dark. Metal, coiled tight, waiting. The bedroom gives us the child's fear. The TV gives us the era. But the technology that will define this tragedy is still hiding in the walls, in diagrams, and in calm voices on old tapes. We are drifting slowly from crying fits and television laughter into mechanisms and procedures, into the quiet engineering that makes all of this possible. At the heart of that engineering site the springlock suits, those strange hybrid creations that are never quite one thing or the other. In one position, they are full animatronics, metal frames under fur and fabric, walking and singing on their own for the innocent crowds. In another, with the locks engaged and the endoskeleton compressed, they become wearable costumes that a human can step into. A compromise between show and staffing, between budget and spectacle. It is clever, even elegant, but it is also the kind of elegance that hides sharp edges. In the games themselves, the original Fredbear's never proudly wheels these suits onto the main stage in front of us, and yet the evidence is everywhere around the edges of the timeline. Blueprint images tucked into sister locations files quietly depict the dual mode designs, with human silhouettes standing where endoskeletons should be, while the infamous training tapes in later titles speak in patient procedural tones about how to manually compress the animatronic parts and how failure may result in springlock failures and irreparable bodily harm. The minigames, too, whisper their part, showing back rooms and yellow rabbits that move like men, not machines. Those tapes are especially telling, not only for what they say, but for how they say it. The voice is calm, almost bored, walking us step by step through a checklist of danger as though it were nothing more than a closing routine. Do this, then this. Avoid moisture. Avoid sudden movement. I evacuate the suit if you hear the mechanism slipping. It mirrors the tone of this story, quiet and measured, while beneath that gentleness we can feel the haunted shadows of what these instructions are really preparing us for. They are lullabies for workers standing inches away from a metal bear trap. Once we understand that, a new thread in the tangled web becomes visible. The same technology that lets a performer walk among children as Spring Bonnie, shaking hands and posing for pictures, is the technology that will later snap shut with enough force to crush bone and pierce flesh. Entertainment and execution are built into the same frame, the same bolts, the same coiled springs. The legacy of the springlocks is not just that they malfunction, but that they were ever asked to be both safe costume and autonomous robot at the same time. And somewhere along this timeline, in the quiet hours of back rooms and storage closets, a man in a rabbit suit will trust those locks one time too many. The training tapes have already warned him. The blueprints have already sketched his coffin. The minigames have already shown a yellow figure slipping through doors like a restless spirit. But he keeps walking. As we move forward, we will see how the smiling suits of Fredbear's family diner become Iron Maidens for their maker, and how his final gasping lesson still isn't the last secret these mechanisms are hiding. From diner to franchise, reading the first paper trails, and while William keeps walking toward his metal grave, something else begins to move around him, quietly, on paper. In the haunted shadows of this timeline, and our first real anchors do not arrive as screams or minigames, but as documents, drifting slowly across the screen when the quiet hours of a shift are over. Before we ever see the mimic in a warehouse or Gregory in a mall, we see something much smaller, a paycheck. In Five Nights at Freddy's 1, after you survive your week in that cramped office, the game does something very plain. It hands you a slip of digital paper, your name, your meager pay, and in the corner, a date. For many players, it was just the end of a long, tense run. But for those of us tracing history, that little timestamp whispered when this particular Freddy Fazbear's Pizza existed, and it did so long before we knew how it would sit beside the brighter, busier FNAF 2 location. The date quietly declared, "This is late in the story. This is after years of quiet tragedies," and around that paycheck, the walls themselves start to talk. Newspaper clippings fade in and out of the static, their headlines half blurred, their bodies reduced to smudges of text, yet still heavy with meaning. Grand reopening. Under new management. Local pizzeria threatened with closure. Each fragment suggests a rhythm. A place opens, children laugh, something terrible happens, and then a new sign goes up over the same haunted building. Step by step, those headlines sketch a cycle of optimism, tragedy, and rebranding that becomes the company's entire legacy. Players began to notice. They would pause midnight, letting the fan hum and the cameras sit still, just to lean closer to the screen and read every crooked line of print. What looked like background decoration turned into a fragile archive, and in that archive, a rough chain of events appeared. First, there is a family restaurant, then a closure, then a grand reopening, then another threat of bankruptcy, as if the restless spirits are not only haunting the suits, but the business model itself. The game never says this out loud. It simply leaves the documents there, waiting for someone awake enough not to let the tale wash over them completely. This is where the tangled web tightens. As more games release, more paychecks appear, each stamped with its own date, each insisting quietly that one location must come before another. For a long time, fans placed FNAF 2 first and FNAF 1 second, building elaborate theories around the toys and the withered classics. Then, one particular paycheck amount and its date are examined more carefully, and that simple number forces everyone to stop, rewind, and slide the pieces of the first two games into a new order. We will come to that moment soon, when a single week's wages overturn years of assumptions and pushes the timeline into a new shape. But for now, we sit with the realization that in this dreamlike history, ink on a page can be as powerful as blood on the floor. The first missing children, headlines that haunt, and that idea that ink on a page can rearrange an entire history brings us to one of the earliest and most chilling pieces of evidence we ever receive. A grainy newspaper clipping that flickers into view between nights in the first game. The image is blurred, the text partially obscured, but a few phrases emerge from the static with uncomfortable clarity, like whispers in the quiet hours of an empty restaurant. 5 children reported missing, a suspect seen in a yellow suit. Strange odors and mysterious fluids leaking from the animatronics. The article is small, easy to overlook, yet it settles into the shadows of the story and refuses to leave, because in those few lines we are quietly told that something far worse than malfunctioning robots is happening behind the smiling masks. We are not shown the crime. We are not given faces or names. We are offered instead a headline that feels like the first crack in a cheerful facade. Before we ever see a minigame, before restless spirits drift across an 8-bit screen, this clipping plants the seed that defines the entire legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Children have vanished. A man in a yellow spring-based costume has lured them away. Their bodies have not been found, but the animatronics now smell wrong, bleed wrong, move wrong. From that moment, the idea of murdered children hidden in suits is not a theory. It is quietly baked into the world's own local news, hanging there like a warning no one heeded. As we return to our security office in the first game, this context reshapes everything we see. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy are no longer just malfunctioning mascots. They are potential tombs, heavy with a tragedy we can almost feel pressing through the screen. Their aggression toward the night guard, their compulsion to drag us into a spare suit and force us under metal crossbeams, reads less like random hostility and more like a distorted echo of what was done to them. Those long, haunted stares from the doorway, those moments when a face lingers just a second too long on the camera, and begin to look like children searching for the man in uniform who hurt them. Later, when the minigames arrive, they do not replace this implication. They illuminate it. In Five Nights at Freddy's 2, the Give Gifts, Give Life sequence unfolds in simple, blocky images, yet it feels like a ritual. We watch a puppet drift from body to body, placing gifts, then masks, and with each gentle motion, the still forms awaken. Step by step, the game confirms what that old article only dared to suggest. The children's souls have taken refuge in the suits, restless spirits bound to metal and fur, seeking justice, or at least recognition. Because of this, that early grainy newspaper becomes more than a background texture. It becomes a fixed point in the timeline, a quiet anchor that later clues must orbit. New games can shift dates, they introduce new locations, or reveal deeper science behind remnant and possession. But if they stray too far from the core tragedy of those first missing children, the emotional center of the story begins to slip away. As we move forward into other incidents, other headlines, we carry this one with us, drifting slowly through a history where every new revelation must still answer to that first, haunting report of 5 innocent lives that never came home. Purple shadows. When a killer gets a color. We leave those first missing posters behind, but we do not leave the murderer, because as the timeline moves forward, the games give him something new, something simple, and strangely powerful. A color. In the quiet hours between jump scares, hidden in FNAF 2's minigames, a blocky figure moves through the halls, not with a detailed face or a dramatic weapon, but with a calm, deliberate stride, rendered in a single, unnatural shade. He is not named yet. He is only the Purple Man. In that 8-bit world where children are bright and primary, where party rooms glow with crude reds and blues, the choice of purple feels like an intrusion, like a bruise blooming under the surface of a dream. He is defined more by motion than by features, drifting slowly from left to right, stepping calmly toward crying sprites and empty suits, a walking absence of light in a place that pretends to be cheerful. No animatronic shares that color. No mascot costume claims it. Purple hangs on him like a shadow that refuses to match the room. By the time we reach FNAF 3's minigames, the silhouette changes, and with it, the questions deepen. One purple figure wears a badge. Another appears broader, or shorter, or with a slightly altered outline, as if the haunted shadows of one man's life are being sliced into different phases, different uniforms, different nights on the job. Some fans look at those variations and see multiple killers, a tangled web of security guards and managers, all stained by the same crimes. Others see a single presence aging and shifting, passing from day shift to night shift, from technician to owner, from human to something less easily defined. The games never say it aloud, but they scatter quiet clues around him, like breadcrumbs in the dark. A security badge on his chest that matches the ones we see in the office. A hallway layout in a minigame that echoes the cameras we flip through. Even the placement of a car outside, waiting patiently in the parking lot, becomes part of the argument, as if the asphalt itself remembers who locked up that night. We begin to map his legacy not through dialogue, but through doors, key cards, and the way the camera pans when he enters a scene. Step by step, William Afton emerges from the pixels, not as a fully lit portrait, but as a presence we feel pressing in from the edges of the frame, a quiet tragedy wrapped in a single color that never quite belongs. We still argue, even now, about whether every purple sprite is really him, or whether restless spirits and guilty accomplices share his hue. But the games are already guiding us toward a quieter, more specific truth. Somewhere, in the background, a single license plate waits, parked and unremarkable, are ready to tell us more about this man than 3 entire games of chasing his shadow ever could, if we notice it. Reading the parking lot, the license plate that spoke. And so, we follow the camera, drifting slowly past the threshold of the pizzeria and out into a space we rarely think about. The parking lot, that quiet strip of asphalt where the fantasy ends and the fluorescent reality begins. In one of those grainy minigame scenes, while we're focused on children, on sprites, on doors and hallways, there it is in the background, a boxy little car, still and patient, its license plate marked with a sequence of letters and numbers that feels far too deliberate to be random. It just waits there, at the edge of the frame, like a confession no one has asked for yet. Players noticed. They paused. They squinted at the pixelated plate, and they wrote those characters down, treating them not as decoration, but as a code that must belong somewhere in this tangled web of tragedies and dates. In a series where paychecks and TV programs already anchor the history, that plate seemed to whisper in the same language. Initials that could resolve into WA, numbers that could mirror a key year on the timeline, or fragments that could be rearranged into phrases we already associate with William Afton and his legacy. It felt like a subtle signature from the killer himself, not carved into a wall in blood, but stamped on state-issued metal. As theories spread, the car stopped being an object and quietly became a person. We begin to imagine William finishing his shift, stepping out from behind the security desk or the back rooms, crossing the dining area where animatronics stare into haunted shadows, and then simply walking through the employee door to this waiting vehicle. He unlocks it, sits down, turns the key, and drives home through ordinary streets. The thought is painfully mundane, and that is what makes it so chilling. The man behind the purple sprite does not dissolve when the lights go out. He merges back into traffic, a predator wrapped in the same routines as any tired parent or night worker. That license plate becomes a bridge, step by step, between all the different purple figures we've seen across games. The lanky murderer in the FNAF 2 minigames, the more blocky driver silhouette, the security presence implied by badges and keys. The plate quietly insists that these are not separate boogeymen, but the same man traced through different lenses. Our Afton is not just a color moving through corridors. He is a registered owner of a car, a man with bills, with a commute, with a life that continues before and after each quiet tragedy inside the restaurant walls. In that way, the plate is more than an Easter egg. It is a perfect example of FNAF's design philosophy, where the most explosive revelations sit calmly at the margins, waiting for restless spirits of fans to notice them. The history of this series is written not only in jump scares and boss fights, but in paycheck dates, TV broadcasts, blueprints, and this single, unblinking rectangle of numbers and letters. If a car in the parking lot can tell us who the killer really is, then what else have we missed? Half hidden in the static and the corners of these screens, I'm still waiting to rewrite the story once we finally turn our gaze toward them in the quiet hours of the night. Paychecks and panic. When dates reordered the games. And that brings us to one of the quietest, yet loudest details in the entire series. The dates at the bottom of our paychecks. We had already learned to stare into the haunted shadows of grainy cameras and cryptic minigames. But a simple slip of paper, fluttering onto the desk at the end of the week, would quietly demand that we rearrange the whole early history of Freddy Fazbear's. For a long time, most of us moved through the story in a straight line. FN, AF1 was the first game released, so we assumed it must show the earliest point in the narrative, the original location, the beginning of the tragedy. From there, though we imagined each new game stepping forward along the same path, one restaurant closing as the next opened, a clean, comforting sequence trying to impose order on a tangled web of murders, mascots, and restless spirits. Then FNAF 2 arrived, and at first it felt like a natural escalation. More animatronics, more vents, more chaos. But when the final night ended and the paycheck appeared, everything shifted. The date printed there, November 12th, 1987, wasn't just a flavor detail. It was a quiet announcement that this bright, toy-filled pizzeria was set years before the events of the original game. A prequel, hiding in plain sight on a line of ink, most players glance past on their way back to the title screen. Suddenly, the language around us made new, unsettling sense, and the phone calls mentioning a grand reopening, the way Phone Guy talked about the old location and older animatronics, the worn with history withered Freddy and his companions standing beside the glossy toy models. All of it began drifting slowly into a different configuration. When we placed the FNAF 2 paycheck beside the FNAF 1 check, dated in the early 1990s, the illusion of a simple release order timeline dissolved, and we were forced to accept that the restaurant we first survived in was already living in the shadow of an earlier, blood-stained attempt. This reordering sent ripples through every theory that had grown up around the missing children and their quiet tragedies. If FNAF 2's building came first, then the 1987 attacks, the infamous Bite of 87, and the possession of the classic animatronics had to be reconsidered, which suits were already haunted during the grand reopening. When did the original missing children incident occur relative to these paychecks? Was Golden Freddy already bearing the weight of those innocent souls before we ever sat down in the FNAF, one office, listening to Phone Guy's final messages in the quiet hours? Step by step, fans rebuilt the early timeline around these numbers, treating them as anchor points in a sea of shifting interpretations. The years on the checks, once background decoration, became some of the strongest evidence we had, pinning down closures, reopenings, and the evolving legacy of Fazbear Entertainment. It is almost gentle in its simplicity. One date, one piece of paper, quietly rearranging years of speculation. And as we move deeper into the era of bites, bedrooms, attic and a television glowing in the corner of a child's room, that lesson lingers, because the next clue that rewrites everything won't arrive with a jump scare, but with another small detail, waiting patiently to be seen. Masks, suits, and souls. Visual proof of possession. So from that single date on a paycheck, we move from paperwork to faces in the dark, and the clues stop being numbers and start staring back at us. In the quiet hours of those early games, when the cameras flicker and the fan hums, the animatronics do something that pure machines should not do. They wait, they linger, and their eyes seem to follow you through the haunted shadows of the building. You notice it with Freddy first, drifting slowly at the edge of a hallway, his face half swallowed by static. The light catches the glossy surface of his eyes, but there is a stillness there that feels less like a program and more like a presence. Watching, measuring, almost remembering. Chica's beak hangs open in a silent, permanent scream, yet when her head tilts toward the office window, it reads as attention, as focus, as if some restless spirit behind the plastic is trying to decide whether you are friend, foe, or simply the next in a long line of quiet tragedies. Then the mini-games arrive, and what had been a suspicion becomes a ritual played out in flat colors. In Give Gifts, Give Life, we see the puppet move from child to child, laying gifts over still bodies. And at the end, the masked children do not just receive presents, they merge with animatronic heads. A simple arcade sequence becomes a ceremony, step by step, the game calmly showing us souls being paired with suits, our innocence being locked inside metal jaws and painted smiles. The masks themselves become a language. The designs and colors echo between scenes. A yellow bear mask on a child's face, a similar hue staring back from the stage. A fox mask with sharp teeth, mirrored in Foxy's own broken grin. We begin to read the party rooms like a code book, realizing that certain masks appear both on laughing children and on the animatronics they will eventually haunt, implying a one-to-one connection that quietly rewrites the history of who is inside each suit. Subtle changes in behavior deepen that impression. Golden Freddy does not move like the others. He arrives as a collapse, as a sudden slumped apparition in your office, or a face filling the screen without footsteps or warning. It feels less like a patrol route and more like an emotional outburst, as if the spirit within him is slipping through the rules of the game to lash out, to be seen, or to replay the moment of its own tragedy over and over again. All of this prepares us for one last image that will not make sense until much later. A small party, a paper-masked child, and a celebration called Happiest Day. For now, it is just another minigame, another strange room in this tangled web of memories, but we will come to understand it as a funeral and a release, a gentle undoing of everything Give Gifts, Give Life set in motion. And when we finally return to that room and see who is waiting there, the entire arc of these spirits will shift beneath us once more. The TV in the bedroom, a single screen, or a split timeline. From that party room of masks and forgiveness, we drift back, quietly, into a smaller space, a more intimate stage for these quiet tragedies. Before the screams, before the hospital, before the bite itself, we are simply walking through a house in the dark, guided step by the soft glow of a hallway and the restless shadows of toys on the floor. This is the FNAF 4 home, and at its center is a child's bedroom that feels less like a level and more like a memory we have been invited to inhabit. You can almost map it out in your mind. The narrow hall that leads to the door, the closet with its hanging shapes, the scattered plushies, the worn rug, the simple bed pressed against the wall, and in the corner, almost an afterthought, sits a small television on a low stand, in the kind of boxy set that once hummed quietly in living rooms long before flat screens and streaming. Between nights, when the monsters rest and the house falls still, you can walk up to it, press a button, and watch. On that screen, the world shifts. Grainy lines, muted colors, and a gentle, looping jingle usher in Fredbear and Friends, a cartoon broadcast that feels like it has been pulled straight from another era. The characters are cheerful, rounder, softer, moving with that slightly stilted rhythm of early animation, as if they were drawn on cells and photographed frame by frame. It evokes the age of Saturday morning blocks and toy commercials, when shows were as much about selling plush bears as telling stories, and when an innocent child might dream of visiting the real Fredbear just down the street. Fans noticed this immediately. The television's retro aesthetic, the wood paneling and patterned wallpaper, the style of the furniture, even the design of the toys scattered around the room, all drifted slowly toward an earlier point in history. It did not feel like the late 1980s of FNAF 2's paycheck dates and more modern equipment. It felt older, closer to the early 1980s, when home video was still settling in, and local restaurant mascots were advertised with simple jingles and smiling, hand-drawn faces. And that quiet detail changed everything. Because if FNAF 4's house belongs to the early 80s, then the bite we witness in its minigames, the tragedy at Fredbear's family diner, cannot be the same bite of 87 spoken about in the first game's phone calls. 2 bites, 2 incidents, 2 points on the timeline instead of 1. The crying child's fate becomes the bite of 83, while the later, unseen attack in a different location still waits in the haunted shadows of 1987. In a series filled with security logs and newspaper clippings, it is this small, optional interaction, a TV most players glanced at once and moved past, that became one of the strongest anchors for that interpretation. A single screen, playing a single cartoon, quietly split the history of Fazbear into separate wounds, and in the next stretch of this timeline, we will follow how that division reshapes our understanding of the Afton family themselves. Walking the house, posters, plushies, and a crying child. From that flickering cartoon screen, we drift out into the rest of the house. Because FNAF 4 does something unusual for this series. It lets us walk the family home, room by room. Hamayan lets the decor quietly speak when no character ever does. We are not just watching a tragedy unfold at a restaurant. We are moving through the quiet hours before it, tracing the outlines of a family in haunted shadows and scattered toys. The crying child's bedroom is our anchor. It is small, almost cramped, with that familiar bed, the closet that will later become a stage for monsters, and the line of plush animatronics watching from the shelves. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and above all Fredbear, turned into soft shapes that should be comforting but, in this context, feel like a catalogue of fears. The Fredbear plush, sitting alone on the bed or on the floor, is different. It speaks to us through text, guiding, warning, almost parenting. In a game about murderous mascots, the one that seems most alive in this room is a toy, acting like a guardian for a child who has no one else. As we step by step out into the hallway, the house stays dim, lit by that same TV glow and small lamps, the walls lined with framed pictures and neutral decor that feel intentionally generic, as if the game wants us to focus instead on where the color appears, in the bedrooms. The living room itself is quiet, the television looping its cartoon, a couch, a few pieces of furniture, nothing overtly sinister, but the emptiness is its own statement. No parents, no siblings relaxing here. just the restless spirits of a family implied, not shown. When we cross into the older sibling's room, the contrast lands gently but firmly. The bed is larger, the space wider, and the walls are marked not by childlike drawings, but by edgier, more mature posters, cooler robots, darker imagery, a different flavor of obsession. There are toys here too, but they feel less innocent, more like props for pranks than companions. This is the room of a teenager who has grown up with Fazbear, who wears masks, who knows the animatronics well enough to weaponize them against a frightened little brother. From these two rooms, fans began mapping an entire legacy. The small, anxious bedroom with the talking Fredbear became the crying child space, the younger Afton son, who will not survive the bite of 83. The larger, mask-filled room became the domain of the bullying brother, interpreted as Michael Afton, the one who will later walk through underground facilities and face his father's creations. The empty living room, the absent adults, and the way Fredbear plush seems to know too much suggested a missing figure. William Afton, present only in his work, his mascots, and the tragedies that follow. None of this is ever stated outright. There are no nameplates on doors, no cutscenes announcing, "This is the Afton home." Instead, bedroom posters, plushies, and layout become a quiet language, turning interior design into character backstory. As we keep drifting slowly along this timeline, that same language of implication will continue to define the Afton family, and in the next stretch, we will watch how their private wounds spill outward into restaurants, experiments, and a much wider field of victims. The Bite of 83, a birthday party that broke the fandom. Those private wounds do not stay in that quiet little house for long. They follow the Afton children out the front door, across the street, and into the birthday party that will sit at the center of the fandom's dreams and arguments for almost a decade. We leave the bedroom posters and plushies behind, and we step by step enter the crowded restaurant, where an innocent celebration drifts slowly toward catastrophe. In the FNAF 4 minigames, the sequence unfolds in small, almost gentle scenes. We see the crying child, already marked by fear, already haunted by masks and metal teeth, being teased by his older brother and friends who wear animatronic heads like costumes. We watch them corner him, lift him, and carry him through the noisy party, past tables and balloons, up to the stage where Fredbear waits under the dim lights. The crowd laughs, the music plays. It feels like a prank that has gone a little too far, but not yet a tragedy. Then, in one long, horrifying moment, they force his head into Fredbear's open jaws. The spring-loaded mouth closes. There is a single, sharp chomp, a frozen frame of impact, and then the child falls limp as everyone around him stares. No screams, no dialogue, only the image of teeth and blood and a small body on the floor. In the quiet hours after release, players sat with that image and reached for the only language the series had given them. This, they said, must be the Bite of 87. At first, it made perfect sense. FNAF 1 had already told us about a mysterious bite where the frontal lobe was damaged, a workplace horror buried in company history, and now we finally had a visual. One bite, one victim, one infamous entry in Fazbear's long ledger of quiet tragedies. The timeline felt clean. The haunted shadows of the minigame and the phone call in FNAF 1 seeming to overlap into a single point. But the series was never interested in staying clean. As players paid more attention to the background, to that little TV in the child's bedroom and its Fredbear and Friends broadcast, to the era-specific cartoons and the way the show is dated to 1983, a different picture began to emerge. The house decor, the technology, the style of the restaurant itself all whispered the same thing. This party is earlier, this party is 1983. This party cannot be the bite of 87. A single date on a television quietly split the story in two. And with that realization, the emotional weight of the timeline changed. Instead of one legendary incident echoing through company memos, we now had multiple bites, multiple victims, our multiple ripples of guilt and cover-up spreading through Fazbear history. One child in 1983, crushed during a birthday prank, and another, unseen victim in 1987, attacked in a different place, at a different time, for reasons we still debate. The legacy of the restaurant becomes heavier when you understand that the jaws closed more than once. This was the first time a small detail forced the community to rewrite years of theory overnight. But it would not be the last. If a cartoon on a bedroom TV could redraw the boundary between 83 and 87, what else might be hiding in license plates, paychecks, or a single, offhand line of circus music? In the next stretch of our timeline, we follow that question into murders, missing children, and a new kind of possession that makes the bite look almost simple by comparison. Soft reset, pausing to breathe in the haunted timeline. So before we plunge any deeper into murders, missing children, and that new kind of possession waiting ahead, we slow down for a moment. We let the noise of theories fall quiet, and we look back at the path we've already walked together. From the first small diners and their smiling mascots, to Fredbear's family diner humming in the background of a TV cartoon, to the neon halls of the early Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, our timeline has already stretched across years of quiet tragedies. We have watched Springlock suits creak and fail. We have seen a frightened boy in a striped shirt, and we have met the man who will come to stain this history more than anyone else, the one we call the purple guy. To help our minds, especially if you are drifting slowly in and out of sleep, we gather the most important clues in one calm breath. A newspaper clipping, yellowed and grainy, whispering about missing children and closed doors. A paycheck date at the end of a long week, quietly anchoring which restaurant came first and which is already dying. A purple sprite on an old pixelated minigame screen, walking through haunted shadows between arcades and back rooms. A TV cartoon of Fredbear and friends, looping in a child's bedroom, telling us that this is the era of the bite of 83, not the later wound everyone once assumed. A birthday party, balloons and cake, and an animatronic jaw, ending in the first major bite that will echo down the entire timeline. If those details blur together for you, that is all right. In the quiet hours, memories of license plates, posters, and crying children can slip away at the edges, like a dream you almost remember. This story is built to loop back on itself, to return again and again to its anchor points, so that each time you hear them, they settle a little deeper. The diner, the Springlocks, the missing children, the purple guy, the bite. Imagine the whole history of Fazbear as a long, dim hallway. Along both sides, doors stretch out into the distance, each one labelled with a single clue. Newspaper clipping. Paycheck, 1987. Purple sprite. TV cartoon. Birthday party. So far, we have only opened the first few, peering into rooms where innocent laughter turns to tragedy, where restless spirits begin to stir, where a tangled web of decisions forms the legacy of this company. We are still near the entrance. Many doors remain closed, waiting. Some are marked with things we have not yet truly faced. Remnant, scooping room, sister location. Because beneath the familiar pizzerias, under the tiled floors and prize corners we think we understand, something new is being built. Step by step, an underground complex is taking shape. A hidden sister location where experiments on life and death move from rumor into cold, mechanical reality. And our next door will open down there, below the surface, where the story changes again. Downstairs, in the dark, enter sister location. Down there, the lights change. We leave the flickering neon of dining rooms and prize corners behind, and we descend into something quieter, colder, more deliberate. The story that once played out in open lobbies and birthday booths now slips into the haunted shadows of an underground facility, and where the laughter of children is replaced by the hum of machinery and the distant creak of metal. On the surface, Freddy's has always tried to look innocent. Bright carpets, cartoon murals, cheap party hats scattered across sticky tables. Even when we knew the tragedies hiding behind those painted smiles, the spaces themselves were built to feel welcoming, like a dream of safety that never quite matched reality. Sister location breaks that illusion on purpose. Circus Baby's entertainment and rental is not a restaurant at all, but a series of long metallic corridors, control modules, and glass-fronted rooms lit by harsh fluorescence and emergency beacons that pulse in the quiet hours. We are no longer watching a stage show. We are walking through a laboratory, and the focus shifts from pizza slices and prize counters to observation windows and maintenance panels, from public parties to private shows for the owner on duty, from open dining halls to controlled environments where every movement can be monitored, recorded, and, if needed, contained. It feels less like a place for families and more like a bunker for experiments that were never meant to see daylight. At the heart of this new chapter stand the fun times. Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy. The designs are smoother, more segmented, almost elegant, with faces that split and rotate, limbs that can extend, torsos that open like medical instruments. They dance, they sing, they tell stories, but beneath the performances we can feel their purpose bending toward capture and control. Compared to the earlier mascots, and they are more advanced, more flexible, and, as the game quietly shows us, far more dangerous. Here, William Afton's remnant research steps out of rumor and into the frame, even if it still refuses to stand in full light. Blueprints tucked into menus show internal reservoirs and injection systems, cavities that are not needed for simple robotics, but make perfect sense for storing melted, haunted metal. Audio logs in the scooping room speak calmly about keeping consciousness alive, about the strange properties of this substance that clings to agony and refuses to let go. We are drifting slowly from ghost story to science, from restless spirits to engineered possession. And yet, the most important clue of this era is not a dramatic cutscene or a jump scare we witness directly, but a quiet set of technical diagrams and schematics, and they sit there, waiting, confirming that Afton has been weaponizing Remnant all along, building machines whose very skeletons are designed to harvest and reuse souls. Step by step, this underground complex tells us that the timeline has changed direction, and the next door we open will dig even deeper into what, exactly, he has turned life and death into. Blueprints and bones, reading the sister location, schematics. And as we linger in that underground complex, the blueprints themselves begin to speak. They are not just props or background dressing. They are diagrams of a philosophy, thin sheets of paper that quietly map out the way William Afton now understands life and death. We see endoskeletons rendered in careful lines, control modules annotated with dense labels, and, tucked among the technical jargon, a chilling word that bends the entire timeline around it: remnant. In these sister location schematics, every part has a name and a purpose. There are pathways traced through the metal ribs of the Funtime animatronics, channels leading from mouth and chest cavities back toward central reservoirs, as if the machines are built to collect something invisible. We see notes about control shocks, facial recognition, capture protocols, and then those mysterious remnant systems, drawn like additional organs threaded through the endoskeleton. It feels less like an entertainer's blueprint and more like an anatomical chart for a new artificial body waiting for a soul. When we let the tale wash over us, drifting slowly past each label and arrow, a pattern emerges. These robots are designed not only to move, dance, and sing, but to capture, store, and manipulate whatever force has been clinging to the animatronics since the earliest hauntings. The restless spirits that once seemed to inhabit suits by accident now look, in hindsight, like the raw material Afton has been trying to refine. The blueprints show ports where remnant might be injected, tanks where it might be held, and circuitry meant to respond to it, as though emotion and agony have become part of the wiring diagram. This retroactively reframes the quiet tragedies of FN, AF 1 and 2. Those possessed suits, the way Freddy and his friends turned from mascots into murderers, no longer feel like random cursed outcomes. Instead, they resemble early case studies, grim experiments that taught Afton that death leaves a residue. Step by step, from the missing children in 1985 to the dismantling of their animatronics, he has been learning how to melt that residue down into remnant, how to inject it into newer, more controlled shells. The sister location documents are the lab notes of a man who has finally systematized what once happened only in haunted shadows. Nowhere is this clearer than in the scooping room. The blueprints and maintenance logs describe articulated arms, injection needles, and a massive scooper assembly, all focused on stripping a human body down while preserving what Afton truly wants. We hear about alloy temperatures, organic material, and transfer procedures, and together they sketch a process for extracting and reusing human material, both physical and spiritual, inside animatronics. The scooping room is not just a place of death. It is a refinery for remnant. In these quiet hours beneath the pizzeria's cheerful facade, the documents confirm what the timeline has been hinting at for years. William Afton is trying to weaponize the dead. He is turning grief, terror, and lingering consciousness into fuel. And as we move forward, we will see how this hidden science seeps out of the bunker and into arcades, malls, and digital realms, extending his legacy far beyond the bodies he first destroyed. Voices in the wires, audio logs, and the shape of experiments. From the moment we leave the blueprints and remnant diagrams behind, we descend deeper into a place where the science starts talking to us directly. In Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, the horror of Afton's work is not just implied by stains on metal and notes in margins, but spoken out loud in calm, recorded voices that treat life and death as routine maintenance. We hear the technicians first. They describe the scooping room like it is just another station on a factory floor, explaining how the scooper is used to remove and replace internal components, how animatronics are to be carefully restrained, how you must check pressure gauges and confirm that the machine has completed its cycle. The words are clinical, careful, and strangely detached, as if they are reading from a training manual. Yet we know, drifting slowly through this timeline, that this same process will later be used to hollow out a human body, to turn Michael Afton into a walking shell for Ennard. Other logs walk us through rental and maintenance procedures, reminding staff to send fun-time animatronics to private parties, to log any unusual behavior, to ignore strange sounds in the vents, and there is a quiet chill in the way dangerous child-killing machines are discussed like party supplies, pulled from underground cages and shipped to birthdays. The staff joke. They complain about late hours. They follow checklists, while in the haunted shadows behind those words, we can feel the restless spirits already gathering. Then, amid those human voices, another presence speaks. Circus Baby herself delivers long, measured monologues, reflecting on what she sees, what she remembers, and what she is forced to do. She describes standing on stage, watching an innocent child approach, feeling her programming seize control. She remembers ice cream, a hand reaching out, and then the sudden, unstoppable lunge as hidden claws deploy. Her tone is gentle, almost apologetic, untorn between the cold directives burned into her code and the consciousness that has awakened inside. In that internal struggle between programming and possession, we hear Elizabeth Afton, trapped and grieving. The logs and baby stories keep circling the accident, never naming Elizabeth outright, but making the connection unmistakable. A child disappeared. A father shut the restaurant down. The animatronic designed to capture children succeeded too well, killing his own daughter and binding her to his frame. This underground facility is no distant experiment. It is the echo chamber of the Afton family's tragedies, a hidden basement built beneath their history. Taken together, the recordings create a terrible contrast. On one side, we have sterile procedure, test numbers, rental forms, maintenance reports. On the other, we have the emotional weight of children's deaths, of a brother searching, of a sister trapped in metal. The story blends these quiet tragedies into a single tangled web, where grief becomes data and agony becomes a resource. We let the tale wash over us and realize that, for William, every loss is simply another variable in his research. And this pattern, this calm voice over unspeakable events, will not stay buried here. In the Pizzaplex era, therapy tapes, staff logs, and retro CDs will echo the same structure. Soothing professionals describing breakdowns, disappearances, and digital hauntings as if they were ordinary case notes. Step by step, the franchise moves from underground labs to neon malls, but the tone of the recordings barely changes, and the question that lingers in these quiet hours is simple and deeply unsettling. When the voices on the tapes begin to sound normal to us, how far into Afton's legacy have we already followed? As we move on, the next set of recordings will answer that in a way that reaches beyond metal and into the code of our dreams. Afton's children, bedrooms, drawings, and a broken family. Those recordings about code and consciousness feel distant, almost abstract, until we remember that behind Afton's experiments, there was a house, a hallway, and a set of bedrooms where his children slept. To understand the timeline, we have to walk quietly through that home, drifting slowly from door to door, and let the tale wash over us through the details on the walls and the toys on the floor. In FNAF 4, the clues begin in silence. A small room, a low bed, a TV showing old cartoons, and the Fredbear and Friends broadcast anchors us in the early 1980s, but it also anchors us in a child's fear. Plushies of Freddy and the others line the walls like watchful guardians, yet the locked doors, the crying, and the constant checking of the hallway tell us this is an innocent younger child, terrified of the mascots that are supposed to be his friends. The bedroom itself becomes a diary of the crying child's inner world. Down the hall, a different space waits in the shadows. The older sibling's room is larger, more cluttered, with posters of edgy cartoons, cool cars, and more aggressive imagery, and the bed is higher, more adult. Here the toys are not comfort but props, used for teasing and masks for bullying. And we feel the contrast clause of this family. One child shrinking away from the animatronics, while another wears a foxy mask and laughs. The house is telling us, step by step, that these are not just generic kids. They are roles in a quiet tragedy. Then, through sister location, the walls of that house suddenly gain a missing room. Afton speaks of my daughter with a chilling formality, and the story of Circus Baby's Pizza World reveals a curious girl drawn to the bright, inviting animatronic her father built. We hear about rules she was told not to break, about getting too close, and we learn that Baby killed her, trapping her as a restless spirit inside gleaming metal. When we look back at earlier hints of a girl in a pizzeria dress, of childlike drawings of a female figure beside Circus Baby, and the timeline folds. Those were not random decorations, but Elizabeth's echo. Fans, in the quiet hours between releases, turned that house into a puzzle box. They mapped wall art, color schemes, and even bed sizes, trying to align the fearful child with the crying child, the taunting brother with Michael, the unseen sister with Elizabeth. Blue and yellow toys near one bed, flowers and brighter colors in another drawing, family imagery scattered like breadcrumbs across minigames and background art. Each detail was weighed against Afton's scattered dialogue about my son, my daughter, and my brother, until the Afton family structure emerged from the haunted shadows. Not every identification is certain, and some of these connections remain gently debated, but the pattern is clear. The Afton home itself is a timeline, or a visual record of a broken family. As we move forward to the next set of clues, the question becomes not just who died where, but which of these children we are really following each time the screen fades to black. The man in the rabbit suit, Springtrap's first death. And as those bedrooms and hallways faded from view, as the family photographs and scattered toys slipped back into the haunted shadows, the timeline seemed to narrow toward one man, one decision, and one final room. We drift from the Afton home to the crumbling corridors of Fazbear's Fright, and beneath it, to the minigames of Five Nights at Freddy's 3. In those quiet, 8-bit vignettes, we guide the classic animatronic step by step through empty party rooms, out of the bright stages, and toward a hidden place. Each night, and another character walks a silent procession to the same destination, until they corner a familiar, trembling figure. The purple guy, stripped of authority, suddenly prey instead of predator. He runs. That's all he can do. Through flickering hallways and broken doors, chased by restless spirits wearing the simplified faces of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy, he stumbles into a decrepit back room we were never meant to see. The floor is dusty, littered with forgotten parts and unused endoskeletons, while the ceiling above him leaks in slow, steady drops, as if the building itself is crying out the history it can no longer hold. This is not the bright carpeted promise of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza anymore. It is the discarded skeleton of a franchise, left to rot in the dark. Against the wall, half in shadow, stands an old spring bonnie suit. No lights, no cheerful posters, just a relic, waiting. The environment tells us everything before a single line of text appears. This is a long abandoned location, a room locked away from parents and children, from birthday songs and innocent laughter. The springlock suits that once defined the early days of Fredbear's family diner now hang like condemned artifacts, their legacy reduced to rust, water stains, and quiet tragedies. Panicked, Purple Guy climbs inside. We watch him slip into the rabbit-shaped shell he once used to lure children, trusting the same dangerous technology he helped normalize. Then the room itself turns against him. In the minigame's simple language, we see the ceiling drip, the spring mechanisms shift, and with a sudden, jagged animation, the suit collapses inward. A metal and barbed component slam down into flesh. The rabbit's grin stays fixed, but his body crumples, pinned and trapped, blood pooling beneath the costume on that forgotten floor. For many of us, this felt like closure. The killer who weaponized these hybrid suits dies by a springlock failure, a poetic justice delivered by the very system he had used to create so much tragedy. The spirits stop chasing him. The screen lingers. It is easy, in those quiet hours, to believe the story has finally caught up with him. But as the timeline kept unfolding, and as stories like Fazbear Frights, The Man in Room 1280 emerged, a darker possibility surfaced. What if this was not the end at all, but the beginning of an even longer suffering? And if his body did not truly die in that suit, then what exactly was still moving behind those burned, yellow eyes? Fazbear's Frights, when side stories rewrote the fire. In those quiet hours after the FNAF 6 fire, when we think the story has finally burned itself out, the timeline drifts sideways into a different medium, and the shadows change shape. Instead of another game, we open a book, and we find Fazbear Frights waiting there, an anthology of quiet tragedies and twisted echoes, where each story feels familiar and wrong at the same time, like a dream based on a memory you cannot fully place. Fazbear Frights is not a single straight narrative, but a collection of short stories, each one inspired by the games rather than chained directly to them. A parallel history where details bend and names shift, while the same haunted patterns repeat. We meet different children, different restaurants, different animatronics, yet the legacy of missing kids, restless spirits, and broken fathers keeps resurfacing, as if the universe itself is rehearsing the same tragedy over and over again. The result is a tangled web of almost canon, a mirror held up to the games that reflects their themes more than their exact events. Among these reflections, one stands out like a slow-burning coal in the dark: The Man in Room 1280. In this story, we step by step into a decaying hospital, where a man lies in a bed so horribly burned that he should not be alive, his body ruined, his nerves screaming, his skin clinging in patches like melted plastic. The doctors do not understand how he continues to breathe. Machines fail to explain it. He refuses food, refuses care, and yet he will not die, because something inside him, or perhaps clinging to him, will not let him go. The staff whispers that a presence surrounds him, a vengeful force that protects and torments in the same breath, warding off death so that suffering can continue. Crosses fail, prayers do nothing, and the man's very existence feels like a curse on the building, a knot of agony that reality itself has to work around. When you read it in the quiet, You can almost hear the faint echo of crackling fire and distant carnival music, drifting slowly in from another continuity. It did not take long for fans to see him as a bookworld William Afton, a metaphorical twin to the Springtrap we watched burn in FNAF 6. The burn body that cannot die, the invisible angry presence, the sense that punishment is being stretched out beyond reason. All of it feels like a sideways retelling of Afton's fate, a reminder that his story is not about simple death, but about persistence. Even if this is not game canon in a strict sense, it is emotionally canon, shaping how we feel the timeline. When you place the man in room 1280 beside the FNAF 6 fire, a darker possibility emerges, that Afton's consciousness, his will, maybe even his remnant, can survive beyond any single body, clinging like smoke to whatever form it can find. The books and games are distinct branches of history, yes, but this story quietly taught us to expect that Afton would not end with a corpse in a suit. It primed us to look beyond the flames, into the digital haunted shadows that would follow, and to ask what new shape his presence might take next. Happiest Day, a birthday party is a funeral, and while Afton's presence lingers beyond bodies and beyond fire, there is one scene in this timeline that feels almost defiantly final, a quiet refusal to let the first tragedy echo forever. We drift slowly into it at the end of Five Nights at Freddy's 3, where, after nights of phantoms and burning memories, the game offers a small, easily missed doorway to peace. In the Happiest Day minigame, you guide a single masked child through a muted party, a place that feels like a birthday frozen between dream and memory. The room is small, the colours soft, the music subdued rather than celebratory, and around the edges, other children wait in simple animal masks, their faces hidden, their movements restrained. At the centre sits one more child, still and silent, in front of a birthday cake that has clearly been waiting far too long. When you finally approach, or when the candles are acknowledged and the moment is accepted, the scene does not explode into noise. Instead, the children fade, and a cluster of balloons rises gently into the sky. Visually, it is the missing children incident inverted, a tragedy played in reverse. In the original murders, a man in a spring Bonnie suit lured innocent kids away from the noise and light of the dining area into the back rooms, into the haunted shadows where no one was watching. Here, instead, masked children come forward, not to disappear into suits, but to surround and support one central child in the open. We move from isolation to gathering, from a back room to a cake in the middle of the party, from life being taken to a quiet release being granted. Many players read this as the moment those restless spirits finally received the party they were denied, a birthday that is also a funeral, or perhaps a funeral disguised as a birthday. The cake becomes a kind of altar, the masks a reminder of the animatronic faces they once inhabited, and the balloons drifting slowly upward feel like souls untethering from metal and memory. No rage, no jump scare, no demand for justice. Just a gentle acknowledgement that their story, at least, can end here. Placed alongside the burning of Fazbear's Fright, this minigame feels like emotional punctuation. The attraction, built on newspaper clippings and props from the old locations, tries to profit from quiet tragedies, and then it too goes up in flames. In the same game, we see the building burn, and if we unlock Happiest Day, we see the children rise. And step by step, the timeline suggests that while Afton's legacy and remnant will continue, the first generation of haunted animatronics has finally been allowed to rest. That sense of closure changes everything that follows. When later games show new hauntings, new animatronics, and new experiments with agony and code, they feel less like the same wound reopening and more like new chapters growing from an old, complicated history. The original Freddy's victims are not endlessly trapped. They have an ending, and that ending makes room for the story to move on into newer faces, stranger technologies, and different forms of possession waiting further down the line. Simulated pizzerias, FNAF 6, and the illusion of choice. And as that chapter closes, with masks removed and children finally at peace, and we find ourselves drifting slowly into a different kind of Freddy's. On the surface, it feels gentler, brighter, almost like a dream of what this legacy was supposed to be. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator presents itself as a light-hearted business venture, a playful tycoon where we buy paper plates, neon stages, novelty animatronics, and decorate our very own restaurant one catalog item at a time. We choose floor plans and attractions, we manage budgets and sponsorships, and the game laughs along with us, as if the tragedies of the past were distant history rather than fresh scars. Step by step, we are encouraged to chase higher ratings, to fill the dining room with color and noise, to believe this is finally a harmless simulation of a once haunted brand. But in the quiet hours between shifts, the tone shifts, then the cheerful menus give way to something colder. Hidden just beneath the business facade are the salvage sequences, those dim, flickering rooms where we sit alone with broken animatronics and a tape recorder. Scrap Baby, Molten Freddy, Scrap Trap, Lefty. Each one is invited in under the pretense of profit, their parts and performance value logged like ordinary assets, while we follow Henry's instructions and proceed with the salvage. It is here, in the haunted shadows of these side rooms, that the illusion of choice starts to unravel. We think we are deciding whether to throw them away or bring them inside, whether to risk jump scares for higher revenue, but the secret endings and hidden lore make it clear that the outcome is already written. The pizzeria is not a playground. It is a snare. Henry Emily has built this location as a carefully constructed trap, a stage designed to gather the restless spirits and William Afton himself into one contained inferno. His final speech, delivered over the crackle of flames, reveals the truth we have been circling for years. He speaks of luring his daughter's puppet, the amalgamated souls, and the man who caused it all into one place, not to entertain, but to end a tangled web of quiet tragedies in a single, purifying fire. When we look back, the environmental clues were always there. The strangely compartmentalized layout, the heavy doors and vents we monitor every night, the secluded back room where salvages occur, all arranged like channels guiding gasoline toward a single point of ignition. This building was never meant to stand the test of time, and it was designed for containment and incineration. A disposable coffin disguised as a franchise reboot. And yet, as the flames rise and Henry bids them goodnight, the wider timeline whispers a warning. Later, in digital realms and Pizzaplex-era ruins, echoes of Afton's influence persist, through code, through mimicry, through corrupted therapy and AR games, suggesting that even this carefully planned fire did not erase the source, only changed its shape. If the pizzeria was a trap for bodies and metal, what kind of prison will we need for something that learns to live in data instead? Soft Reset 2, from fire to fiber optics. So we pause here, in the glow of that last fire, and look back over the long road that brought us to this question of prisons and data and things that refuse to die. And we began in small dining rooms and quiet stages, with Fredbear's Family Diner and the earliest Freddy's locations, where innocent birthday songs covered the first quiet tragedies. Step by step, the timeline carried us from simple mascot suits to Springlock hybrids, from smiling posters to missing children whose names were never printed on the menus. We watched Afton, in his spring bonny guise, move through those early restaurants, the way the FNAF 1 and 2 paychecks quietly anchored us in time, telling us which building came first even when the games released in the opposite order. We followed him into back rooms and maintenance halls, into the moment where he dismantled the possessed animatronics, melted their endoskeletons into remnant, and turned grief itself into a tool. Above ground, parents saw only out-of-order signs and newspaper clippings. Underground, in sister locations, labs and scooping rooms, the real experiments continued in haunted shadows. Along the way, the story kept offering us endings. Springtrap's first death, trapped in a decaying safe room after the springlocks failed, felt like justice. A villain sealed away behind bricks and forgotten blueprints. The Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3 showed us masked children, balloons, and a final party that seemed to release the original missing children, a gentle promise that their restless spirits could finally drift free. Even the resolution of the crying child's tragedy, framed by that FNAF 4 TV cartoon and the Fredbear and Friends broadcast, gave us a sense that at least one chapter of this tangled web had closed. Then came FNAF 6, Henry's speech, the trap, the flames. For many of us, that was the moment we exhaled. It felt complete. The original animatronics gathered, Afton's twisted forms contained, the puppet and the children's souls given a chance at peace within the fire. In those quiet hours after the credits, it was easy to believe this was the final page, that the legacy of Fazbear could finally rest. But stories like this rarely end cleanly. Metal can melt, buildings can collapse, yet data lingers, code persists, and designs are copied, archived, and reimagined. If Remnant was the science of haunted metal, the next era asks what happens when those same patterns of obsession and cruelty are written into software. The hauntings do not stop. They change format. Here the timeline's soft resets, not with another grand opening, but with a loading screen. In Help Wanted, the clues are no longer just on paper plates and wall posters, but inside games within games, hidden in glitching minigames and corrupted prize corners. Security Breach will carry that further, into a neon pizzaplex, where therapy sessions, AR overlays, and retro CDs whisper that the past has only gone underground again, this time inside fiber optics and headsets, instead of basements and safe rooms. As we move forward, drifting slowly into this digital age, we will see how the same old ghosts learn to wear new masks. Help Wanted, a game inside the game. And so, as fiber optics replace back rooms and glossy headsets replace dusty security offices, Fazbear Entertainment unveils its next quiet solution to decades of scandal: a video game. Help Wanted arrives in-universe as a polished VR experience, our curated collection of greatest hits from the company's troubled history, promising to turn lawsuits and missing children into marketable nostalgia. It's presented as harmless, as entertainment, as a way to rewrite a haunted legacy without ever admitting the depth of the tragedy underneath. On the surface, the premise is simple. Players strap into a VR headset and move through remade versions of the first games, from cramped security offices with flickering cameras to repair bays and darkened hallways, each space rendered with a gentle sheen that suggests control and safety. Fazbear's new marketing line claims they are recreating old locations, using salvaged circuit boards and historical data, smoothing out the rough edges, trimming away the quiet tragedies, and turning them into something you can buy, download, and stream, and it feels clean, sanitized, almost comforting. But as we drift slowly through these familiar rooms, we notice that this is history told by the corporation, not by the restless spirits that once filled those suits. The cameras are sharper, the jump scares are theatrical, the menus are playful, and yet the shadows feel wrong, as if someone is editing the story in real time, choosing which details of the tangled web may be remembered and which will be quietly buried. For us, outside the fiction, Help Wanted becomes a meta layer, a dreamlike museum of earlier games, filtered through the same company that caused the harm in the first place. And within that digital museum, something else is moving. In corners of the hub room, in secret screens and background reflections, a strange, yellow-green, rabbit-like figure begins to appear, and watching without speaking. This is Glitchtrap, a mascot that was never advertised, a character that never appears on the official posters, yet keeps stepping forward from the code, one gentle shuffle at a time. At first, he is only a distant observer, waving slowly, almost invitingly, as if asking you to follow. Scattered through the game, hidden like confessions, we find tapes and developer logs from a tester who realized that something in the VR build is wrong. She describes corrupted data, fragments of old Fazbear systems, and a presence that reacts when she looks at certain models or runs certain minigames. Piece by piece, her recordings suggest that whatever was once trapped in obsolete hardware and burned out circuit boards has seeped into this new project, hitching a ride on scanned assets and legacy code. By the time we reach Help Wanted's secret endings, the implication has settled in the quiet hours between jump scares. This rabbit is not just a glitch. He guides you through ritual-like sequences, presses you to obey, and in one ending seems to slip into the player's body, as if trading places. Step by step, later clues across the timeline will confirm what we are already feeling here, in the haunted shadows of this VR compilation. That Glitchtrap is Afton's persistence given a new skin, less a simple virus and more a familiar killer, learning how to live again inside the machine. Tapes, tones, and Glitchtrap's smile. And the game itself seems to know this, because buried beneath the bright menu screens and familiar jingles, Help Wanted hides something quieter, more fragile, and far more disturbing than a jump scare. It hides a voice. We begin to find it in those secret cassette tapes, scattered through levels like forgotten evidence, each one recorded by a quality assurance tester who is trying, very calmly, to explain that something in this build is wrong. At first, her reports feel technical and mundane, the way any late-night bug log might sound during the quiet hours of development, as she notes glitches in collision, strange model behavior, and a persistent figure that appears in places it should not. But drifting slowly through her entries, a pattern emerges, as she describes a presence that does not act like code, that seems to watch her when she tests alone, that appears in test environments where no asset of that type has been loaded. The tone is still professional, but beneath it, we hear the edge of quiet tragedies beginning. As the tapes progress, her language shifts from detached to personal, and that shift is its own clue. She talks about seeing a yellow rabbit shape at the edge of her vision, even when the headset is off. About feeling compelled to run the build again and again, despite her own unease. Step by step, we realize that Glitchtrap is not only inside the game. He is inside the tester, exerting a gentle but relentless pressure. By the final recordings, she is no longer simply describing bugs. She is describing an overwrite, a mind being crowded out by something patient, something that learns through repeated exposure, until you and it are no longer cleanly separate. The game's audio design quietly underlines this possession. When Glitchtrap appears, we do not only see the flicker of his model, and we hear faint circus music that feels like an echo from Circus Baby's world, distorted laughter that recalls the cruel joy of fun-time performances, and little melodic stings that twist the classic Freddy's jingle into something sour. These are not random sounds. They are a haunted legacy, tying this digital intruder back to the same man who built the fun times, who experimented with Remnant, who turned children's laughter into a weapon. In those tones, in those familiar motifs warped through static, the timeline bends. The implication is that William Afton's consciousness, or at least an echo of it, has been captured in Fazbear's new code, a remnant of Will now riding on every headset, every port, every update. The haunting leaves the ruined pizzerias and underground bunkers and seeps into servers and circuit boards, and into homes where innocent players simply want a brief escape. The restless spirits we followed through suits and corridors are now joined by a killer who has learned to live as data. From this point on, the story is harder to contain, because how do you burn a ghost that lives in backups and patches and mirrored archives? Help Wanted's tapes and tones whisper that we are no longer dealing with one building, one fire, one body to trap. And as Fazbear pushes further into AR, overlays, mobile games, and therapy programs, we will see just how far that echo of Afton is willing to travel, and whose mind it will quietly reach for next. Security breach, neon lights over old graves. And just when it feels as though the threat has dissolved into data and distant servers, Fazbear does something very old in a very new way. It builds another restaurant. Not a cramped hallway maze or a hidden bunker this time, but a cathedral of consumption, stretching up into the night like a neon lighthouse for restless spirits and tired parents. The Mega Pizzaplex arrives in the timeline as a towering glass and steel monument to reinvention, all glam rock colors and polished stages, an almost desperate promise that the legacy of quiet tragedies is behind them. We see the bright posters, the holographic stars, the themed attractions that echo old mascots while insisting they are safer, louder, friendlier now. From the outside, it is a dream of family entertainment scaled up to a city block, a place where history has been smoothed over with laser lights and arcade jingles. But as we drifting slowly past the food courts and party rooms, the building begins to betray itself. Beneath the arcade carpets and neon stripes, there are sealed-off corridors whose walls do not match the new construction. Maintenance shafts that open into tiled spaces laid out like older pizzerias, and loading docks that lead to storage areas filled with broken, familiar silhouettes. You find Roxy Raceway above, and then, in the shadows below, a buried Roxy Raceway sign in a different font, like an echo from an earlier attempt. You ride Phaser Blast, and somewhere far under your feet, a concrete hallway still remembers the smell of the original Freddy Fazbear's. The Pizzaplex is so large, and its layers stack so quietly, that environmental storytelling becomes the only honest tour guide we really have, and clues are not handed to us in cutscenes. They are tucked into utility tunnels, where old safety posters peel beside new branding, into back rooms where retro cabinets hum next to decommissioned endoskeletons, into secret basements where a ruined Freddy's dining room has been entombed rather than demolished. Step by step, the mall reveals itself as a palimpsest. Every new coat of paint laid directly over an older floor plan, an older tragedy. Into this labyrinth of old and new history walk our new protagonists, Gregory and Glamrock Freddy, a runaway child and a malfunctioning mascot who somehow chooses to protect instead of perform. We move with them through the atriums and catwalks, hiding in photo booths, slipping through staff-only doors, listening as Freddy's gentle and glitching voice hints that he remembers more than his programming allows. Their journey is not just a chase. It is a tour through Fazbear's buried past. And the most important clues of security breach do not wait on the main path at all. They hide in retro therapy CDs you only hear in quiet hours, in AR session logs scattered through prize counters and maintenance closets, in optional wings like the ruined Phaser Blast office or the sealed-off daycare sub-levels that many players ran past in the rush to escape. As we follow those threads, the tangled web of Gregory, Vanessa, and that digital echo of Afton will begin to emerge from the haunted shadows of this glowing mall, and the facade of reinvention will start to crack. Retro CDS and therapy rooms, Vanessa, Gregory, and the rabbit in her head. Those cracks widen when we notice something else, quietly waiting in the carpets and corners of this glittering maze, scattered throughout the pizzaplex, tucked behind arcade cabinets, perched on catwalks, resting in forgotten maintenance halls, are strange, translucent retro CDs, objects that do nothing in most of the building, yet hum with meaning in very specific places. Only in the hidden therapy rooms, those softly lit offices behind frosted glass, can we play them and let the tale wash over you. When we do, the noise of the mall falls away, and we are left with the gentle hiss of a recording and the measured voice of a therapist speaking to a patient whose name is never given, but whose identity presses through the static. Session by session, we listen to a young woman struggling with intrusive thoughts, with missing time, with the feeling that her own mind is not entirely her own. She reports blackouts, unexplained actions, and a presence that seems to watch from the haunted shadows of her thoughts. The therapist is calm, clinical, but we can hear the quiet tragedies building underneath. The patient talks about a rabbit that appears in her head, about a costume, about someone who helps her make decisions while taking away her choices. She mentions VR experiences, test programs, and a game that should have been harmless entertainment, yet left behind echoes that will not fade. Step by step, the conversation drifts slowly from ordinary workplace stress to something more like possession, but through code instead of remnant. For players who remember help wanted, these details land with a quiet, terrible clarity. In that earlier chapter of the timeline, a glitchy rabbit avatar, nicknamed Glitchtrap, seeped out of corrupted development files, waving slowly, beckoning the tester to follow, to obey, to merge. Now, in these CDs, we hear the aftermath. A patient whose memories have been altered, who cannot fully recall what she signed up for, who feels a digital echo of someone else riding along behind her eyes. The rabbit, the VR headsets, the missing hours at work, all trace a line directly from Glitchtrap's emergence to Vanessa's present-day suffering. The recordings never pause to say the quiet part out loud. No one on the tape declares, Vanessa is Vanny, controlled by Glitch Trap. Yet the pattern becomes almost impossible to deny. A security guard with a history of VR testing, a rabbit figure that whispers instructions, a split between the bright, helpful employee and the masked figure luring an innocent child through service tunnels. The legacy of Afton's influence has simply traded spring locks for software. Against this, Gregory begins to feel less like a random lost kid and more like someone placed deliberately in the story. He wakes up inside the Pizzaplex with no parents in sight, navigates maintenance corridors with practiced ease, hacks security systems, and dismantles animatronics as if he understands their weak points. He knows to distrust Vanessa almost immediately, and when Vanny appears, hopping along in that stitched white suit, Gregory is the one who consistently confronts her, routes around her, or in certain endings, helps bring her down. In the quiet hours of the game's exploration, these therapy CDS turn what could have been a simple cat and mouse chase into a tangled web of shared corruption. A girl whose mind was rewritten by a rabbit in the code. A boy who moves through this building like he's been here before. And a digital Afton who refuses to stay dead. Their restless spirits brush against one another in every session log. As we move forward, other secrets in the Pizzaplex will deepen this connection, and the question of who Gregory really is will only grow harder to ignore. The Afton ending, wires, flesh, and a digital ghost. So when those session logs fall quiet for a moment, and the Pizzaplex seems to return to its neon routine, we follow Gregory and Freddy down one last hidden path, drifting slowly away from the noise above. Behind false walls, through service corridors and forgotten loading bays, the building begins to feel older, the paint peeling, the lights thinning into shadows, until an elevator carries us deep beneath the foundation into a place that should not be there at all. Down here, the bright plastic of the mall gives way to concrete, ash, and twisted metal, as if we've slipped through a crack in the timeline and fallen back into the haunted shadows of an earlier fire. We step by step approach a vast chamber where something has taken root. A great, choking tangle of animatronic limbs and cables, like a mechanical plant that grew from the wreckage of Scrap Trap, Molten Freddy, and the other broken shells left behind after FNAF 6. It hangs from the ceiling and walls, a quiet monument to previous tragedies, and at its center, like a rotten seed, sits a single, seated figure. Fans call him Burntrap, but the name is less important than what he represents. This central body, scorched and skeletal, carries the familiar silhouette of Spring Bonnie, yet reinforced with new metal, new wiring, and a fresh endoskeleton frame, as though someone has been patiently rebuilding a throne for William Afton's return. His movements are weak, almost puppet-like, but his presence is unmistakable. This is the latest physical shell for that stubborn, cruel legacy that refuses to leave the stage. Around him, the tangled web of wires is not just decoration. Insecurity breaches Afton ending. We watch as Glitch Trap's digital influence seeps through the Pizzaplex systems, hijacking Vanessa, corrupting the Glamrocks, and finally reaching down into this buried corpse of a man. The code in the VR rabbit suit, the therapist's quiet warnings on the retro CDs, and the way Vanessa's eyes seem empty in certain endings all point to the same convergence. The digital ghost of Afton riding the circuits of the building until it confuse with these physical remains and rise again. The room itself whispers of history. The layout echoes the final trap of FNAF 6, a central stage-like focus, surrounding metal catwalks, industrial vents, charred props that feel like they were pulled straight from that last, purifying blaze. Old Freddy heads, rusted monitors, and burned wall textures suggest that this chamber was built out of, or directly above, the site where Henry tried to end everything with one last fire. We are not just under the Pizzaplex. We are under a grave that never quite held its dead. And even in this apparent final showdown, with Burntrap dragged into the flames and the amalgam collapsing, the game is careful not to give us the peace we might expect. The camera cuts away, the smoke rises, but there is no clear body, no confirmed release, only restless spirits and unanswered questions. In some endings, we see Vanessa on the rooftop and also lying masked on the ground, as if the echo of Glitchtrap still lingers, as if Afton's consciousness has learned too well how to slip between flesh, metal, and code. As we move into the Pizzaplex's other endings and DLC, that lingering uncertainty will only deepen, and we will have to ask whether this was truly an ending at all, or just another mask he wears in the quiet hours between fires. Tales from the Pizzaplex. Which stories really matter? That question about endings, about masks in the quiet hours between fires, and leads us gently to a different kind of mask in this timeline. The stories that sit beside the games, reflecting them, but not quite touching. Tales from the Pizzaplex arrives here as a companion in the haunted shadows of the Pizzaplex era. A collection of short stories, much like Fazbear Frights before it, all set in or around glittering neon-lit entertainment complexes that feel very much like the mega Pizzaplex we know, and yet remain just a step to the side. On the surface, these stories read like distant dreams of the main continuity, drifting slowly around familiar shapes. We see digital hauntings that echo Glitchtrap's rise, corrupted attractions that feel like distorted cousins of Faza Blast or the daycare, AI copies of children and staff that bring to mind Gregory, Vanessa, and the therapists on those security breach retro CDS. The tone, the technology, the quiet tragedies of families and lonely kids all mirror the games, while the details quietly remind us that we are not meant to take every plot point as literal history. Then, every so often, the line blurs. A story about a rogue AI that learns through mimicry and refuses to die feels very close to the mimic's legacy, even if the names are shifted. Another tale follows a runaway boy, hiding in a Pizzaplex-style complex, chased by security systems and animatronics that read like alternate versions of Gregory's Long Night, as if we're peering into a parallel draft of the same tragedy. There are therapy programs, VR experiences, and AR overlays that twist people's perception, all quietly reinforcing the idea that Fazbear's newest horrors live as much in code as in metal. Here is where the fandom becomes archivist and detective again. We move step by step through recurring motifs. A familiar model of endoskeleton, a recognizable family name, a location that shares its layout with the mall-like Pizzaplex, a type of bracelet or band that calls back to Faz watches and AR headsets. Fans track these echoes along the broader timeline, asking which elements are soft canon hints toward how the mimic spreads, how digital therapy is weaponized, how children can be copied, backed up, and lost. Then, a pattern interrupt. A story will suddenly use a name like Vanessa, or a technology that perfectly matches the games, and attention snaps awake again, as if the book itself is whispering, "This part matters." Even if not every tale is a direct puzzle piece, taken together, they gently push the franchise's themes toward one destination: digital immortality and fractured identity. We watch characters split between bodies and backups, AIs wearing human memories like costumes, children wondering whether they are original or copy, while restless spirits migrate from remnant and suits into servers and networks. As we move forward into the Pizzaplex's other endings and the Ruin DLC, these stories will sit beside us like quiet guides, not strict records of history, but warning lights on the edges of the path, showing how far this haunted legacy can spread when the walls between flesh, metal, and code finally dissolve. The Man in Room 1280 and FNAF World echoes across media, and as those warning lights flicker at the edge of our path, we can drift slowly sideways for a moment, into the places where this story escapes the games entirely and returns wearing a different mask. In the quiet hours of the Fazbear Frights collections, one story in particular stands out like a hospital monitor in a darkened room. The Man in Room 1280. Here, we find a man whose body should have died long ago, burned, broken, and ruined, yet held upright by something that refuses to let go. Nurses speak in hushed tones, priests feel an unnamed dread, and the man in the bed is less a patient and more a vessel, his flesh a cage for a will that simply will not release its grip. The imagery lingers: tubes, bandages, the smell of smoke that will not fade, and a presence pressing against the edges of a ruined body, as if the real occupant is already looking for a way out. When we place that beside FNAF World, the contrast in style is almost jarring. Bright colors, playful music, chibi animatronics bouncing through a fractured landscape. Yet beneath that cheerful surface, there is a quiet, persistent wrongness. Glitches tear open the map. Strange eyes watch from the void, and a mysterious figure talks to you like a director stepping out from behind the curtain, mentioning a puppet master, hinting that someone or something is pulling strings across realities. It feels like a dream you only realize is a nightmare once you try to wake up. These two works, one a grim bedside vigil, the other a meta, almost toy-like RPG, sit together in the same tangled web of implications. In Room 1280, Afton's influence is no longer just a man in a suit. It is a force that animates a corpse beyond reason. In FNAF World, and that same influence seems to reach through code and pixels, nudging events, breaking rules, speaking directly to the player as if the boundaries between character, creator, and audience have thinned. The haunted shadows are no longer confined to a single basement or back room, so fans begin to follow those echoes. If a body can be kept alive by hatred, if a digital world can acknowledge a hidden controller, then perhaps Afton's consciousness is not a single tidy ghost at all, but something distributed, fragmented, embedded in multiple systems at once. Remnant in metal, agony in flesh, corrupted routines in arcade cabinets and VR headsets, each piece a shard of the same restless spirit. Step by step, an interpretive web forms, not from explicit declarations, but from resonances between lines, recurring images of puppets and strings, and the shared metaphor of a will that refuses to die. As we move back toward the main timeline, we'll see how those ideas quietly color our reading of later games, especially as we enter the Pizzaplex proper, where bright attractions and digital mascots may be carrying far older ghosts than anyone on the surface is willing to admit. How many frames change a story? Micro clues and macro shifts. So, as we step back from the broad strokes of novels and side stories, we find ourselves returning to something smaller, quieter, and strangely more powerful. The single frame, the half-second glimpse, the detail that flickers past, while we are drifting slowly through a night shift. In a series built on haunted shadows and restless spirits, it is often the tiniest, most fragile images that end up carrying the heaviest weight in the timeline. Think of the license plate in the parking lot outside a pizzeria, visible for only a moment. Numbers and letters arranged in a way that suggests a name, a date, a connection to the purple figure we have followed through so many quiet tragedies. For some, that plate was the first hint that there might be more than one purple guy, or that the man we thought we knew was commuting from a very particular grounded life with a family, an address, a history that did not begin and end in a security office. One painted rectangle of metal, and suddenly whole theories about identity and responsibility had to be reconsidered. Then there is the paycheck, crumpled and modest, its dateline printed in small, unassuming numbers. In FNAF 1 and 2, those dates quietly anchor us, telling us which restaurant closed first and which week of history we are inhabiting. Whether we are looking at 1987 or the early 1990s, a single number on that slip of paper forced the community to rearrange entire walls of notes and diagrams overnight, moving the byte of 87, relabeling locations, and redefining which ghosts would already be present in which suits. On the TV in FNAF 4, a cheerful cartoon and the Fredbear and Friends broadcast play in the background, their era-specific visuals whispering that we are in the early 1980s, not the late 1980s at all. That flicker of a program, that style of animation, turned the debate over the byte of 83 versus the byte of 87 into a tangled web of possibilities, where the crying child's fate, the order of the restaurants, and even which sibling stood beside the bed all shifted with the glow of that tiny screen. Its sister location offers blueprints, lines of text, and measurements that many players only glance at once. Yet those diagrams quietly confirm remnant experiments, scooping procedures, and shared endoskeletons long before later games say the words out loud. A single line on a blueprint, a label on a tank, can redefine how we understand possession itself. Not just a ghost in a suit, but a liquid legacy of agony, moving from shell to shell. If the games had never given us explicit years, never printed a surname, never spoken Afton or an Emily aloud, which of these environmental clues would we still trust to build the story? Would we follow the TV, the posters, the paychecks, the retro CDs, letting the world itself guide us, step by step, through its own quiet hours of tragedy and survival? When you wake, you might think about your own favorite overlooked detail. Some object in the background you believe still matters. A mask on a shelf, a reflection in a monitor, a scrap of music in a hallway that you are certain points to an innocent child or a hidden experiment. Let the tale wash over you now. But remember that these fragments are how we stitch the timeline together. Soon, as we move deeper into the Pizzaplex era and beyond, we will gently gather these threads, drawing the license plates and paychecks, the cartoons and blueprints into one soft, cohesive picture of the saga as it stands. And in the next stretch of this long night, a single arcade cabinet and a smiling rabbit will add yet another frame that changes everything. FNAF Reset 3, letting the whole timeline settle. So before we chase that arcade cabinet and its smiling rabbit, we ease back, almost like rewinding a tape in the quiet hours, and let the whole timeline settle around us. We have been moving quickly through a tangled web of restaurants and bunkers and virtual spaces. Now we drift more slowly and simply walk through the eras again, step by step. We return first to the 1970s diners, to Fredbear's Family Diner and those early Fazbear experiments, where a single newspaper clipping on a wall quietly announced a local business expanding, even as Springlock suits waited in the haunted shadows of the back rooms. From there, we move into the missing children era, anchored by those grainy FNAF 1 newspapers that slide across the screen between nights, telling us, in restrained, an almost clinical language about disappearance, tragedy, and a company already learning how to hide. Then we let the lights of FNAF 1 and 2 glow again, one after the other, or perhaps on top of each other if you are drifting slowly towards sleep. A simple paycheck in FNAF 1, stamped with a date and a modest wage, quietly rewrote years of fan theories, while FNAF 2's check and its grand reopening line grounded another point on the timeline. 2 slips of paper, 2 anchors in a sea of restless spirits. We cross the street to FNAF 4's house, with its low TV murmuring a Fredbear and Friends cartoon, the era-specific broadcast that nudges the bite of 83 into place, surrounded by plushies and bedroom posters that hint at siblings, fears, and an innocent child watching his world close in. A little later, we descend to sister location and following blueprints pinned like evidence on a conspiracy board, their notes on remnant and control shocks confirming that the science of possession was never an accident, but a deliberate, methodical violation of death. F, N, A, F, 3 and 6 arrive as a quieter coda, yet they carry some of the most decisive fragments. In FNAF3, the Happiest Day minigame offers masks, balloons, and a final party that feels like narrative closure for the original missing children, while FNAF 6's true ending folds an entire legacy into one burning building and a calm monologue about setting things right. Then, the world tilts. Help Wanted steps into VR, and a handful of corrupted tapes transform a background mascot into Glitch Trap, while Security Breach scatters retro CDs through the Pizzaplex. Therapy sessions that quietly weave Gregory, Vanessa, and this digital rabbit together. If the exact order begins to blur for you now, that is all right. Let the tale wash over you. What matters is the feeling of a long, haunted investigation. A history assembled from paychecks and TVs, blueprints and minigames, tapes and endings. Across the years, we have become detectives, archivists, almost historians of a fictional tragedy, piecing together quiet tragedies from whatever evidence Scott left on the table. In our next Karma Pass, we will gather only the biggest story-changing clues and see what they reveal about FNAF as a whole, and about why this dream of robots and ghosts has stayed with us for so long. 5 clues that moved mountains. So now, in these quiet hours of the timeline, we can slow down and hold a few pieces up to the light, and the way you might turn a photograph in your hands and notice new details each time. Not every clue moved mountains, but some did, quietly reshaping everything we thought we knew. The first is that humble FNAF 2 paycheck, a slip of paper, a date in 1987, and suddenly the comforting idea that FNAF 1 was the beginning cracked apart when we realized FNAF 2's nighttime chaos, with its toy animatronics and withered originals, had to happen before the grim, stripped-down FNAF 1. The early history reoriented itself. The old pizzeria became a later, failing location. The new and improved site became a flashback to a more crowded, hopeful era already rotting from the inside. With one number, the timeline stopped being linear and started drifting slowly between past and present. The second mountain-moving clue flickered from a television in a child's bedroom. In FNAF4, the Fredbear and Friends cartoon, with its chunky, early 80s style and era-specific broadcast feel, anchored the bite of 83 in a way dialogue never did. The show's aesthetic, the way it matched the house, the posters, the arcade cabinet, all whispered that this tragedy was earlier, a separate wound from the bite of 87 we heard about in phone calls. One TV program playing in the background of a restless dream quietly split one legendary bite into two distinct events, and the fandom's arguments had to bend around that. Later, deep underground, the sister location blueprints arrived like technical documents from a nightmare laboratory. They named parts, described injectors and reservoirs, and hinted at molten alloys and captured souls without using those exact words. And in doing so, they confirmed what had lingered in the haunted shadows for years. Remnant was not an accident. It was a project. The hauntings of earlier games stopped feeling like spontaneous curses and started reading as deliberate experiments, step by step, a science of agony that William Afton refined with each new design. In the neon ruins of the Pizzaplex, another quiet set of documents waited. The security breach retro CDs, those therapy recordings, took Vanessa, Vanny, and Glitchtrap, three shapes in a tangled web of masks, and tied them together with clinical, almost gentle language. We hear Vanessa's doubts, the digital infection of Glitchtrap, the suggestion of a second self, and suddenly the rabbit suit is not just a costume but a symptom. Without those sessions, Gregory's story and the larger digital corruption would float unmoored. With them, the legacy of possession shifts from metal and remnant into code and conditioning. And finally, there is the license plate. A tiny rectangle in a parking lot, a few letters and numbers that most players never noticed. Yet it did something profound. It made Purple Guy feel like a man who paid registration, who drove home after these quiet tragedies, who existed between murders. In a series full of ghosts and restless spirits, that one mundane detail grounded him in our world, reminding us that behind the monster was once an ordinary person, and that may be the most unsettling clue of all. As we move forward, we'll let the tale wash over us again, looking not just at what happened, but at how these details taught us to read this haunted history in the first place. Every time, we thought it was over. And as we learn to read those tiny details, we also start to notice another pattern, drifting slowly beneath the surface of this haunted history. Every time the story seems to fold in on itself and end, something in the shadows quietly refuses to stay finished. Think back to Five Nights at Freddy's 3. To the fire that was meant to cleanse everything. The attraction burns, the Springtrap suit is left behind, and in the Happiest Day minigame, we watch masked children celebrate, hand over the final cake, and walk through the door into light. It felt gentle and complete, a release for the original missing children, a quiet tragedy finally eased. Yet later, in novels and side material, we find suggestions that not every spirit moved on, that some remnant of Afton, some restless echo of agony, still clung to metal and memory. We felt that same closing of the curtain with Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, the sixth game. Henry's speech is calm and final. The building is flooded with fire, and he addresses the trapped souls directly, promising an end to their suffering and to William's legacy. Step by step, the flames rise, the screen fades, and for a moment it seems that the tangled web has finally been cut through. But then Help Wanted arrives, and in its credits and hidden tapes, in that flicker of Glitchtrap's fingers and the suggestion of a digital possession, we realize that something of Afton has survived again, translated into code instead of circuitry, a help wanted. Itself pretends to roll credits on the nightmare. The game is framed as a corporate cleanup, a way to rewrite history and bury old scandals. You beat the mini-games, you see the names scroll by, and it looks like a neat ending. Yet buried in those tapes, in the therapist's calm voice and the gradual corruption of the tester, the story is already leaking forward into AR, into VR, into new forms of haunted shadows that refuse to be archived. Even Security Breach seems to offer a final confrontation. In the after ending, we descend into the depths, watch Burntrap ensnared, and see the Pizzaplex collapse in fire and dust. Another incineration, another promise that this time the monster is gone. But the retro CDs, the AR therapy logs, and the later ruined DLC quietly hint that the influence behind him, the mimic intelligence and Glitchtrap's digital stain, may have slipped the flames entirely, carrying the dream of Afton's cruelty into a new era. In this way, the series begins to mirror older horror folklore, where ghosts rarely leave cleanly, where stories are told and retold around the fire, each version adding a new detail, a new date, a new face in the corner of the room. The FNAF timeline behaves like that too. Every happiest day is followed by a new unhappy discovery. Every pizzeria fire leaves behind one more mask, one more file, one more clue that the restless spirits are not quite done speaking. For many of us, this can be quietly exhausting. We long for a single, final answer, a last night where the cameras go dark and stay dark. Yet the lack of closure is also what keeps the community awake in the quiet hours, comparing paychecks, decoding license plates, listening again to circus music in the distance. The investigation becomes its own ritual, and the absence of an ending becomes the reason the story still lives. So perhaps the real ending is not any single cutscene, not any fire or final laugh, but the moment we collectively decide to stop looking, to stop tracing this timeline forward. And as we move into the next clues, we have to ask, if the story keeps finding new ways to continue, what exactly is it trying to lead us toward next? You as detective, the community's invisible hand. And as we ask what the story is trying to lead us toward, we have to admit something quiet and important. It has never led us there alone. From the very beginning, no single person walked this entire tangled web of clues by themselves. Instead, thousands of us moved together, drifting slowly through menus and mini-games, pausing on static frames, rewinding jump scares, taking screenshots of grainy hallways and flickering TVs, then carrying those fragments into forums, videos, and late-night comment threads, where the real investigation quietly continued. Those spaces became more than casual discussions. They became collaborative workbenches, where one person's tiny observation could ignite another's larger theory, and where a half-remembered sound effect or a strangely colored poster in the background could suddenly feel like a missing puzzle piece. Someone notices the cartoon on the FNAF. 4-bedroom TV looks like an early 80s broadcast. Another connects it to the Fredbear and Friends era, and together they anchor the bite of 83 in a specific moment in history, and turning a simple pixelated show into a cornerstone of the timeline. In the same way, a quiet license plate in a dim parking lot becomes more than decoration. One player captures it, another deciphers the numbers and letters, a third compares it to security badges and minigame sprites. Slowly, the community begins to see Purple Guy not just as a purple outline, but as a person with a car, a route, a pattern, a legacy of movement that threads through multiple locations. The haunted shadows of his path are mapped not by one mind, but by many. Paychecks, too, became shared artifacts. Someone noticed the dates on the FNAF1 and FNAF2 pay stubs. Someone else lined them up against newspaper clippings and missing children reports. And suddenly, the order of the restaurants, what came first, what closed when, shifted beneath us. A single number on a paycheck, caught by a tired pair of eyes in the quiet hours, rewrote years of fan assumptions overnight. Even the TV cartoons, the faint circus music, the layout of a child's bedroom, or the design of a security badge were not decoded by isolated geniuses, but by restless spirits of curiosity scattered across the world, sharing, arguing, refining, until a consensus gently formed. The story lives in the games, yes, but it also lives in those slow, scrolling threads, in whispered theory videos playing in the background while you drift towards sleep, in the feeling of being part of a larger mind tracing this history step by step. And you are not outside that process. Even if you only ever notice one small detail, a date, a color, a reflection in glass that someone else overlooked, you are already part of this invisible hand guiding the narrative forward. As we move into the next clues, keep that in mind. The timeline we are following is not only Scott's or the characters, but ours collectively, still unfolding in the spaces between each new discovery. A gentle descent, letting the mystery stay unsolved. And yet, even with all of that, every license plate, every paycheck date, every minigame frame we have turned over in our hands, there are still pieces that refuse to fall neatly into place. We can trace the outline of the crying child's bedroom. We can hear the circus music echoing from sister locations' hidden halls. But some details remain just beyond reach, drifting slowly at the edge of our understanding. There are exact dates that blur at the margins, years that slide against each other like misaligned film reels, identities that change shape depending on which angle of the screen you choose to trust. Was every bite, every disappearance, every glitching sprite as simple as one victim and one culprit? Or are there gaps in the record that no amount of replaying will quite resolve? Motivations especially sit in the haunted shadows, hinted at through security logs and blueprints, but never fully spoken aloud. In a different kind of story, that might be frustrating, but in this tangled web of animatronics and quiet tragedies, the uncertainty becomes part of the comfort. There is always another question to return to, another therapy CD from Security Breach to reconsider, another Fazbear Fright story to hold up beside the games and ask whether it is echo or canon. The lore does not close like a locked door. It stays slightly ajar, inviting us back on another quiet night. We do not need to carry every single clue with us. Instead, we can let the tale wash over you in broad strokes. A family broken and scattered. A company that chose profit over safety. A series of tragedies that left restless spirits in metal shells. And a long, patient trail of evidence scattered across decades of this strange history. The paycheck dates in the first two games, the Fredbear and Friends cartoon on an old TV, the blueprints of the Funtime animatronics, these are not burdens to memorize, only stars to navigate by when we feel like visiting again. If we pull back just a little, the whole saga begins to feel like a campfire story, told through security cameras and CRT screens, flickering in the dark long after the building has closed. Instead of flames and smoke, we have static and VHS distortion. Instead of the whispered voices around a fire, we have recorded phone calls, distorted laughter, and grainy mini-games that play like half-remembered dreams. We sit together in the glow of these screens, listening as the timeline moves step by step from diners to malls to digital realms. As we move toward the final parts of this narration, we will slowly step back from the pizzerias, from the underground bunkers and ruined attractions, and return to the present moment. For now, it is enough to know the shape of the story, to feel its legacy resting quietly around us. The finer points can fade into the background, like distant lights in a parking lot, while we prepare to leave the cameras behind and let the building go dark one last time. Soft closing. From flickering monitors to a darkened room. So now, as we leave the cameras behind, imagine that control room one more time, with its wall of flickering monitors and tired buzzing lights, holding the entire tangled web of this history in grainy, shifting frames. For a moment, they still show everything at once. The FNAF 4 bedroom with its TV cartoon looping quietly, the security office with its dated paychecks, the Pizzaplex corridors echoing with therapy tapes and retro CDs. Then, slowly, we begin to power them down. One screen clicks off, and the bite of 83 freezes mid-frame. The Fredbear and Friends broadcast locked on a smile that never reaches the eyes before it fades into black. Another goes dark, and taking with it the paycheck dates that anchored our sense of which restaurant came first and which tragedy followed. A third loses its glow, and with it the faint circus music and scooping room blueprints that whispered about remnant experiments long before the Pizzaplex said the words out loud. Step by step, the haunted shadows retreat as each monitor blinks away. In the quiet that follows, we can let the tale wash over you one last time, not as jump scares and theories, but as a chain of quiet tragedies, of innocent children, restless spirits, and adults who never understood the cost of what they were building. We trace the missing children through newspaper clippings and masked details, watched the Happiest Day minigame offer a fragile peace, and listened as Gregory, Vanessa, and Glitchtrap's roles were hinted at in soft, clinical voices instead of shouted exposition. We moved from curiosity to tragedy to investigation, and finally into a gentle, almost peaceful coexistence with a story that refuses to fully end. Now, let those monitors go completely. Let the hum of the building dissolve. Instead, notice the space you are actually in, the feel of your pillow beneath your head, or the weight of your body sinking slowly into a chair, the temperature of the air on your skin, the rhythm of your breathing, rising and falling in its own steady timeline, older and kinder than any Fazbear location. If your eyes are still open, you might let them rest on a single point in the room, some small, harmless shape in the shadows. If they are already closed, you can simply notice the patterns of color and darkness drifting slowly behind your eyelids. The story is still there, but it no longer needs your full attention. It can stand quietly in the background, like a closed door at the end of a hallway. And here is the small, almost secret thing. You can return to this place whenever you like. You can pick up any one thread at any hour of the night and follow it again. You might come back to that TV in the child's bedroom and watch the cartoon that split a fandom. You might revisit the license plate in the parking lot, the one tiny detail that told us more about Purple Guy than whole games did. You might choose the Pizzaplex and walk those neon corridors until the mimic's digital legacy brushes against you like a passing thought. Or you might simply listen for the creak of a spring-lock suit and remember William Afton's long, spiraling fall. For now, though, and the pizzerias are closed. The animatronics are still. The restless spirits are, if not free, then at least quiet for the night. You are the only one who still needs to move, or to sleep, or to dream. If you are already drifting, you can let the rest of this wash past like distant radio static. And if you are somehow still awake, hovering in that soft space between focus and sleep, this is where we leave an open door. If you wish, in these last quiet hours, you can help keep this long timeline alive beyond your own room. You might share it with someone who once played these games in the dark and never quite understood what they were seeing, or leave a thought about the clue that changed the story most for you, so that, when you return, you find not just the history of Fazbear, but a small archive of other listeners' paths through the same haunted maze. Or you can do nothing at all and simply let the building stay dark, knowing that the story will still be here, patiently waiting, the next time you decide to turn the monitors back on. If you're still awake, a whispered invitation, and if, somehow, you are still here with us in these quiet hours, with the monitors dim and the last echoes of the carousel music fading, then you have walked a long way through this tangled web of Fazbear history. You have followed every faint reflection on a security camera, every newspaper clipping, every whispered line of dialogue drifting slowly through the vents of this story. So, if this calm, careful way of moving through the timeline has helped you rest or study, or simply let the tale wash over you while the day's noise softened into the background, you are gently invited to stay. Only if it feels right, you can like this video or subscribe, not as a loud gesture, but as a quiet nod that this kind of slow, detailed unraveling of haunted shadows is something you would like to return to. When it is convenient, when you are more awake and the world feels less distant, you might leave a small message behind, the way a guard leaves a note on a desk before clocking out. Tell us the one background detail you think everyone still misinterprets. The FNAF 4 TV flickering with its era-specific cartoon. The paycheck dates that quietly shift which restaurant came first. The retro CDs in the Pizzaplex that murmur about Gregory, Vanessa, and Glitchtrap without ever saying their names. Your quiet tragedies, your theories about innocent details that were never really innocent at all, may become the clues we follow in a future investigation. You might, on another night, come back and re-walk certain halls with the lights turned up, just a little brighter. Pause on the television in the crying child's bedroom and listen to the broadcast that pins the bite of 83 in place. Linger on the paychecks from the first 2 games, reading the dates like a time card for the whole franchise. Let your eyes rest on Sister Location's blueprints or the therapy transcripts hidden in those retro CDs, and see how the restless spirits of old minigames and new DLCs quietly agree with one another, step by step, across decades of fictional time. For now, though, the pizzeria has closed. The doors are locked, the dining room is dark, and the neon animals on the walls are only silhouettes against deeper shadows. In the back rooms, the animatronics stand still at their posts, heads bowed slightly, like performers waiting for a curtain that will not rise again until you decide to turn the power back on. The cameras are off. The fan on the desk spins down. The last light on the monitor winks out. But somewhere, in the quiet, a single indicator still glows, a reminder that this story is not truly finished, only resting. There is always another clue in the static, another detail in the corner of the frame, another voice on a forgotten tape, waiting for the night when you come back, press play again, and discover that the timeline was never as simple or as silent as it seemed.